Today, we are diving into a huge and, let's be honest, super relevant topic, all based on the work of social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. We're going to try and unpack one of the biggest questions of our time.
Really think about it. Why can people you know are good, people you know are decent and smart, look at the very same world we live in and come to completely opposite conclusions about what's right and what's wrong? It's something that can feel, really frustrating, confusing, and it gets personal fast.
We all see it, right? We feel it. The world just feels more divided than ever. And these aren't small disagreements we're talking about. These are deep, passionate, moral divides that are really driving us apart. So, how in the world do we even begin to figure this out?
Okay, so the standard thinking goes something like this. If we just give the other side enough facts, if we just lay out our clear, rational arguments, eventually, they'll have to see the light and come around to our side. But come on, if you've ever been in an argument over the holidays, you know that's not how it works. It almost never works that way, and there's a really profound reason why.
All right, let's get into this, because this is probably the single biggest key to unlocking the whole puzzle. It turns out that most of us have the sequence of events in our own minds completely backwards.
So this idea right here, it flips everything we think we know on its head. We love to imagine ourselves as these impartial judges, carefully weighing the evidence before we reach a conclusion. But Haidt's research shows, nope, we're actually a lot more like lawyers. We get an instant gut feeling, an intuition about something, and then our powerful brain kicks into gear to find all the reasons that support how we already feel.
And that's what he calls a moral intuition. It's that immediate flash of yes or that you feel when you hear about something. That's the engine of our judgment. The reasoning part comes later. It's kind of like a press secretary for our gut feelings, and its whole job is to justify those feelings to the rest of the world. So, if our intuitions are in the driver's seat, what's steering them?
And that leads us to the absolute core of this theory, the 6 moral foundations. This is the framework that helps explain where those powerful, automatic intuitions actually come from.
I absolutely love this metaphor because it just makes so much sense. Think about your tongue. It has receptors for sweet, sour, salty, and so on. Well, Haidt's idea is that our minds have a set of moral receptors. We all have them, but our upbringing, our culture, it all tunes these receptors differently. Some of us become super sensitive to certain moral flavors while we barely even notice others.
And here they are, the 6 of them. You've got care versus harm and fairness versus cheating. These are the ones that focus on protecting individuals. But Haidt argues there's more to the story. There's also loyalty versus betrayal. That's our tribal team player instinct. There's authority versus subversion, which is about respecting traditions and legitimate structures. Sanctity versus degradation, dealing with ideas of purity and disgust. And finally, liberty versus oppression, which is our deep desire to be free. Basically, every moral argument we have is rooted in these foundations.
So how does this actually help us understand the political division we see every day? Well, if we all have different sensitivities on our moral taste buds, it makes perfect sense that we'd end up with very different moral palates.
What Haidt's research found was this really fascinating pattern. People who lean liberal tend to build their moral world almost entirely on 3 of the foundations: care, fairness, and liberty. On the other hand, people who lean conservative tend to use all 6 foundations much more equally. Now, this doesn't make one side right and the other wrong. It just means they're experiencing morality through a different set of receptors. They are tasting a completely different moral world.
This brings up a really interesting question, though. Is that liberal focus on individual rights, fairness, and care, the one that's so common in Western countries, is that just the default setting for all of humanity, or is it maybe a newer, more localized thing? To answer that, we have to talk about a huge bias in psychology, and it's summed up by this brilliant acronym that Haidt and his colleagues came up with: WEIRD. It stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. See, for decades, most of the research was done on college students who fit this exact profile, and we just kind of assumed that their way of thinking was how everyone thought. And that assumption, well, it turned out to be profoundly wrong.
Weird societies with this intense focus on individual rights are actually the moral outliers. When you look at most other societies across the globe, you find a morality that is way more balanced across all 6 foundations, one that puts a higher value on the group, on loyalty, authority, and sanctity. So that weird framework, it isn't the global norm at all. It's the exception.
So, what do we do with all this? Knowing this stuff doesn't magically fix all our problems, but it does give us a path forward. It gives us a way to, maybe, just maybe, move beyond the gridlock of us versus them.
Haidt makes another really key point here. Humans aren't just selfish, we're also groupish. We literally evolved to cooperate and thrive in groups. This is what makes us form teams and communities and nations. It's the source of our most incredible loyalty, but it's also the source of our most bitter tribal conflicts. It's like a switch that gets flipped, that suddenly makes us see the whole world as us against them.
So how do we flip that switch off? How do we start to build bridges? This theory gives us a pretty clear roadmap. First, stop leading with just logic. It's not going to work if you haven't connected with the underlying intuition first. Second, just listen. Try to actually hear which moral foundations the other person is coming from. Are they worried about loyalty, about tradition, about purity? Third, try to genuinely understand those values, even if you don't share them yourself. And finally, use that understanding to see them not as an enemy, but as a person who's just operating from a different moral matrix.
And this brings us to what might be the most important takeaway of all. The goal here isn't to erase our disagreements or for everybody to agree on everything. That's impossible, and it's probably not even a good idea. The real goal is empathy. To understand why good people are divided, so that our disagreements can at least become more constructive and we can start to actually make some progress.
I think this quote just perfectly sums up the whole message. It's really a call to change how we engage, to lead with curiosity instead of condemnation, to try and listen for the moral music that's playing in someone else's head, even if it's in a completely different key than our own.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. Think about the people in your own life, at work, in your family, even online, the ones you just passionately disagree with. Now that you have this new lens, whose righteous mind are you going to try to understand first? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.